Hi, folks. Welcome back to Whiskey and Watches with Nick, episode 23. My, how the time flies. You know where I'm going, don't you? Speaking of time, customary wristwatch check. The venerable glycine air pilot. Just felt like putting it on today because maybe I'm reviewing kind of an international man of mystery whiskey, to be honest. A little bit. So, no, never mind. That's a later episode. Tonight we are, however, doing J&B Rare, which is the first whiskey that I want to cover in an ongoing series where I will compare blended Scotch whiskeys to determine who is the best blend. Since J&B is one of my 3 or 4 favorite blended Scotches, and I just kind of have been hankering for it lately, I thought this was just a natural place to start. Now, with blends, I like to actually do a little research on them. I'm not a hardcore whiskey geek, but I like to do a little bit of research into my blends and sort of find out what I'm actually, drinking, what goes into the blends. There's this, I think, really unfortunate prejudice in some quarters of the whiskey world. Quarters? Okay, I'm here all night. That there is a cheapness or like a poor quality to blended scotches, when really that couldn't be further from the truth. When you look at some of the best blends, of which J&B I think clearly is one, you see that they actually have really quality whiskeys in them, really quality single malts that by themselves, in some cases, are quite desirable. For instance, some of the components in Johnny Black, which I'm going to get to very soon, I promise. So there are plenty of great websites that you can look at to do this research. I'm not going to name them in this episode. Maybe I'll do a rundown of some of my favorite whiskey research resources in a later episode. But in this one, I just really wanted to highlight one of my favorite go-to resources, which is Maclean. You've heard me mention Maclean says this or that in some of my previous episodes. Well, this is where I'm getting it from. The World of Whiskey. Excuse me, just World Whiskey. Kind of the authoritative text, an authoritative text on global whiskeys. Obviously, he has a very heavy emphasis on Scotch, Irish, and American whiskeys. He also covers Canadian, Japanese, and I believe he even has a section on some world whiskeys, like covering some of the up-and-coming or less established distilleries from places like Israel or India. That's the second edition, published in 2009. I think there's a later edition out in the States, and maybe even several higher number editions out in the UK. Not really sure. Whatever edition you get, fantastic resource. He does a great job of giving brief but still meaningful biographies of the distilleries, mentioning ownership changes, which you know is a constant topic in the beverage world or in the luxury goods world in general, and certainly in the beverage world, where the name of the game for the last 30 or 40 years has been consolidate. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Maybe I'll get some hate on that in the comments section. That would be awesome, even if you're disagreeing with me in angry comments section. Anyways, I can cover that topic in a separate discussion later. For now, I kind of want to get to the whiskey. So again, for those of you who don't know it, which is probably no one in the world, certainly not in the US, where this is a top-selling whiskey and has been basically for almost 100 years since the end of Prohibition in 1930. That is J&B Rare. J&B stands for Gestorinium Brooks. Not going to go too much into the early history of the whiskey. The story was founded originally, I think, in the middle of the 18th century. Went through a few evolutions of ownership in the 19th. Got bought up by Gilbey's Gin in, I want to say, like the 70s or 80s. And then wound up getting bought by, along with just about everything else, by Diageo, maybe in the 90s. I'm not quite sure. So it is a Diageo brand, and all of its component whiskeys are obviously in Diageo's stable, and we'll cover those in just a second. I want to do a quick nosing and then get on to a little bit more of the ingredients here. Classic Speyside nose. And that's not a bad thing. It's just what it is. But a really good Speyside nose. Very rich, creamy pear. And if you drink Speyside Scotch, you know what I mean by creamy pear. In the produce section, a creamy pear might in fact be something undesirable. In Scotch, however, we like our pears creamy. Yeah. Creamy pear, fresh, like heathery honey. Very nice. So the 3 component whiskeys are, and again, if I have any Gaelic speakers watching, I really apologize. I have studied over a half dozen languages in my life, still speak a couple of them reasonably well. Can't do Gaelic, so again, my apologies for the mispronunciation. The first is Nok Ando, the second is Glen Spey, and the third is the one I'm really going to butcher, Alchroisk. They'll be on the info card that'll pop up sometime around here. Anyways, they're all Speysides, unsurprisingly, given what I just described the nose as being. Nokando also wound up in the Diageo stable through their Gilbey's Gin acquisition. And Clean considers Nokando a gentle, grassy cereal character with a creamy texture. Okay. For Glen Spey, he says it has a light, grassy nose and a brisk, nutty flavor. Okay. And he considers the finish of the Glen Spey component dry and short. Okay. And the Ahroisk, the third one, an aromatic Speyside with, I quote, a wisp of smoke, end quote, citrus and malty notes. So the question we want to ask ourselves naturally when drinking a blended Scotch is, are we actually able to identify any nose or palate characteristics that the component whiskeys contribute? So this is a little mental exercise I do when I'm researching the component whiskeys in the blends that I like. In this case, I have to say that the component whiskeys, if we're going off McLean's description of these whiskeys, because I've certainly have never seen any of them on the shelf in the old corner liquor store in the US here, so I'll take his word for it, I'm getting that. So from the Nokando, the creaminess definitely is there, not just texturally, but in my mind, aromatically. Grassiness or cereal? Let's get it on the palate and see. Maybe a hint of a vegetal note. Yeah, I can see that. From the Glen Spey, again, he mentions a little bit of grassiness on the nose. I didn't catch that initially. Let's double check. Not getting anything I'd consider grassy, but now that he mentions it, is there perhaps a little pecan nuttiness on the nose? Not unreasonably. And finally, with the third component whiskey, the aromatic Speyside with the wisp of smoke, maybe a very faint wisp. We're going to talk about that in depth here very soon. Trust me, it's not weird like I made it sound. It's cool. You'll like it. Maybe it's even creepier. So yeah, the component, the characteristics of the component whiskeys, which McLean describes, are present in the finished product. Go figure. So, I got a wisp of smoke there for sure. But let's get this on the palate again. And for sure, that is a short, fairly dry finish. So, moral of the story is, A, McLean knows what he's talking about, or his contributing writers at least certainly do. He's the editor-in-chief. He didn't write the entire thing himself. He'd be dead. No one could drink that much whiskey. But how best to enjoy J&B? How best to enjoy a blend in general? Neat? Well, it's certainly a fine enough whiskey that it can be had neat and fully enjoyed. It's not at all harsh, doesn't drink hot. It has a very light, smooth, easy mouthfeel, as we'd expect from a high quality Speyside. As you can see, I'm holding a rocks glass in my hand, and one with a fairly well melted rock. So I discovered this during my first test tasting last night, where I was drinking down the neck and shoulders, that when I put it on a small rock, the smoke flavor really came alive. So let's see if we can get more than a wisp here. Yeah, really, this is a little bit too much rock, and I let it melt just a little bit too long. It is slightly more diluted than I would like it, but still, the smaller rock is probably the way to go. And by rock, I mean ice, unless you have those cool little like chilling rocks you can put in. Anyways, but that wouldn't contribute to water, which is what is actually, I think, bringing the smoke characteristic alive here. So try it neat to start with. Pop a smaller than this, rock into a dram, and then try it slightly chilled with some water dilution. And I think you'll really enjoy the smoke feature, which, you know, presumably you get from the third component whiskey. Folks, as always, if you've made it this far, and at coming up on 12 minutes, this is a long one for me, then I really appreciate your time and your interest. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I plan on doing at least several more, at least 3 or 4 more in this series in the next month or two as I get back into Scotch. So in the meantime, drink your whiskey, wear your watches, be well, and I'll see you next time.